Have you ever listened to politicians or journalists arguing about the meaning of the Commerce Clause when they claim that it either enables or prohibits some expansion of the power of the federal government? Do you wish you could cut through all of the hype and truly understand the Commerce Clause and why it's so controversial? Well, you've come to the right place. Fasten your seatbelt. You're in for a bumpy ride. The Constitution of the United States of America was ratified by the states in 1788 and took full effect with the swearing-in of George Washington as President and John Adams as Vice President on April 30th, 1789. The Constitution is over 7,000 words long. It's amazing how just 12 of those words have done as much as all of the rest to expand the power of the federal government. It's the section of the Commerce Clause which declares, "The Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce among the several states." Simply put, the Commerce Clause, which is the third clause in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, grants Congress the power to pass laws regulating interstate commerce. But what does that really mean, and how does it affect you? There have been profound changes in the way these words have been interpreted by Congress, by the President, and by the Supreme Court since the Constitution was ratified. These changes have greatly increased the extent to which the federal government regulates the everyday lives of all Americans. To truly understand the Commerce Clause, first we must understand why the framers included it in our Constitution. Once the Continental Congress declared America's independence from Great Britain in 1776, they needed to figure out how to make the 13 colonies work together to actually win their liberty. The resulting agreement, called the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union, was the first Constitution of the United States of America. The articles which defined how the new republic would function were put into effect in 1777, although they weren't ratified by the states until 1781. They gave the national government the authority to direct the Revolutionary War, conduct diplomacy with foreign countries, and handle territorial issues and Indian claims. Under the Articles, each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence, and every power, jurisdiction, and right which is not by this Confederation expressly delegated to the United States. This meant that every state operated as an independent sovereign country, including in matters of both interstate and foreign commerce. The national government created by the Articles of Confederation had very little power and could not hold the country together. Lack of money was a major issue. The central government had no independent ability to raise revenue. When it needed money to enforce laws, implement treaties, or pay its debts, it had to requisition the necessary funds from the governments of the member states. Each state could decide to reduce their contribution or to ignore the request completely. As a result, the Confederation was effectively rendered powerless. Within less than 10 years, it was in danger of disintegrating. A new constitution was urgently needed to hold the country together. In 1788, the Articles were replaced by what you now know as the Constitution of the United States. The new government began operations in 1789. The authors of this new constitution, known as the framers, laid out their goals for the federal government in the preamble of the Constitution. "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." The first goal, to form a more perfect union, does not refer to some utopian ideal, but to the need to create a more workable union than the one that existed under the Articles of Confederation. The framers of the Constitution knew that trade conflicts had repeatedly plunged the nations of Europe into war. To avoid a similar fate for their new republic, they granted jurisdiction over the regulation of interstate commerce to Congress, instead of leaving it to the individual states. The Federalist Papers are a series of 85 essays published in New York newspapers in 1787 and 1788 to explain the reasoning behind all of the elements of the new Constitution. Their purpose was to persuade people to support ratification. They were published under a pseudonym, but the real authors were Alexander Hamilton, one of the framers of the Constitution and the first Secretary of the Treasury, James Madison, another of the framers and the fourth President of the United States, and John Jay, the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. The Federalist Papers are frequently cited by the Supreme Court as an authoritative primary source for the meaning of the Constitution's provisions. Alexander Hamilton laid out the rationale for the Commerce Clause in Federalist No. 6. He claimed that, when a country's citizens focused their energies on commerce, they were less likely to waste their time in belligerence. Commercial republics like ours will never be disposed to waste themselves in ruinous contentions with each other. They will be governed by mutual interest and will cultivate a spirit of mutual amity and concord. The complete text of the Commerce Clause states, "The Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes." It's the part that grants Congress the power to regulate commerce among the several states that has led to a great expansion in the power of the federal government. We need to look at how our interpretation of the Commerce Clause has changed over time to understand its impact on our lives and on our future. The Supreme Court delivered its first important decision on the scope of congressional power under the Commerce Clause in 1824. Both Thomas Gibbons and Aaron Ogden had exclusive licenses to operate steamboats on the Hudson River between New York and New Jersey. Gibbons' license was granted by Congress. Ogden's came from the state of New York. In the resulting lawsuit, Ogden asserted that Congress had exceeded its authority under the Commerce Clause when it granted a license to Gibbons, because commerce only encompasses the buying and selling of goods, not their transportation. The Supreme Court ruled unanimously that commerce does include transportation, and therefore the power to regulate navigation on the nation's waterways belongs exclusively to the federal government. The court also acknowledged that there were limitations inherent in the very language of the Commerce Clause. They held that the federal government could not regulate commerce which is completely internal, which is carried on between man in a state or between different parts of the same state, and which does not extend to or affect other states. But the court ultimately concluded that it is the responsibility of the people, not the courts, to ensure that the power granted to Congress by the Commerce Clause is not abused. The wisdom and discretion of Congress, their identity with the people, and the influence which their constituents possess at elections are the sole restraints on which the people have relied to secure them from its abuse. To summarize, the Commerce Clause had its origins in the need to pull the new nation together and to prevent the types of trade conflicts which could weaken the Republic and ultimately lead to open warfare between the states. In 1824, the first important Supreme Court Commerce Clause ruling expanded the definition of commerce to include interstate transportation, but it left commerce within a state totally under the jurisdiction of the individual states. And the court reminded the people that it was their responsibility, through the election process, to prevent Congress from abusing its authority. Check out Episode 2, Freedom of Contract, to learn how the Supreme Court used its role as the interpreter of the Constitution to limit the power of the federal government and of the states over the next 111 years.